News reporters crowded around the officers at Gregg Automobile Repairs, trying to piece together the grim scene. The chief of police arrived just minutes ago and asked Detective Anthem, "Are there any survivors?" "Yes, sir," Detective Anthem replied. "Mr. Gregg sustained a broken leg and has been rushed to the hospital for medical attention." Inspecting the scene, the chief inquired, "Are there any clues about who the killers might be?" Detective Anthem lamented, "Unfortunately, we couldn't find CCTV footage of anyone inside the building before or after the incident. Whoever the killers are, they were in the presidential car with the victims." Detective Mitchell chimed in, "What a tragic way to die." The chief asked, "Do you have any clues on how they were killed?" She pointed to a body nearby and explained, "This one was hit in the neck with that lug wrench," pointing to a lug wrench close by. The attacker was only an inch away, and judging by the force, it was a man. Moving to the next body, she continued, "This one was suffocated by a lady, using that nylon bag," indicating a nylon bag on the floor. She then pointed at another body. "This one was hit against that box," pointing to an iron tools box. "He must have had a weaker opponent, and that was the only way to free herself from his grip. Those two were attacked from behind, their necks were ripped off," she said. "They must be skilled, if not the best, as all of this was done without a single gunshot." The chief and all the officers present listened intently. "Scan the bodies for fingerprints, I need to see the president," the chief ordered, and he left, heading for his car. "What a great stunt you pulled out there," Detective Anthem remarked as they both headed for the exit of the building. "Thank you, it's one of my gifts," Detective Mitchell replied with a smile, paying more attention to her phone. Detective Anthem was curious and asked, "So what are the other gifts?" "We will know as the time comes," Detective Mitchell responded. As they made their way to the exit, the presenters rushed to them immediately upon leaving the crime scene, heading for their cars. "What happened here?" one reporter asked Detective Anthem, who ignored her and headed for his car. "Is this, by any way related to the laws?" Quincy asked Detective Mitchell. "Yes," she replied. All the presenters turned their attention to her. "Those men were murdered by the laws to gain access to the presidential official car and use it in carrying out their act. But we are doing everything possible to get hold of them this time around." "Do you think this time around you will get them, or will it lead to a dead end like the previous two?" Quincy asked further. "No, this time around will be different as we are 2 steps ahead of them," Detective Mitchell replied. "As you can see, the bodies are being taken to the police headquarters to be inspected for any fingerprints, so you see, this time around, the case is unique." She then walked toward her car, ignoring further questions from the presenters. Before getting into her car, she noticed Detective Anthem instructing a junior officer who was giving her a suspicious look. She smiled at him when their eyes met, but Detective Anthem gestured that he was watching her. Detective Anthem sat in his office, in front of his laptop. On his desk, there was a cup of coffee, a half-eaten burger, and a file containing Detective Mitchell's info. He had requested footage of her on the day of the hijacking and had spent half of his day going through them. However, he had yet to find any suspicious movement. He wondered why she was staring at her phone without touching the coffee before her. He whispered to himself, "What are you up to, young lady?" As Detective Mitchell hurriedly picked up her coffee and left the shop to answer a call, Detective Anthem couldn't help but feel that he was missing something important. Despite watching the same clip for the 5th time, he couldn't identify any incriminating evidence. He shut down his laptop and headed out of his office. President Kennedy sat in his office, his face tense as he answered a call. His expression revealed his unease as he listened intently to the voice on the other end. He promptly ended the call when he heard the doorknob turning. "Good," he exclaimed, adjusting himself in his seat. "You're the only person I want to see right now," he told the chief of police, who had just taken a seat across from his desk. "How is the investigation going? Have you identified a suspect?" he inquired impatiently. "We still haven't apprehended the laws, but we do have a lead on who they might be," the chief of police replied, placing photos of CCTV footage on the president's desk. Our investigation into Greg's automobile has revealed that the culprits were within the presidential convoy. The governor of the bank has confirmed that each of them wore a cloned mask representing one of us. How did they get the information that we were the ones going, if they didn't have an insider? Or how do we explain this, he asked, pointing at an image of the presidential stamp and signature used to approve the documents. President Kennedy picked up the pictures, examining each one carefully. The laws are among us, he declared, staring at the images that featured all the members of the laws wearing cloned masks of their faces. Meanwhile, Detective Anthem was seated in a cafe, sipping his coffee while occasionally stealing glances at Detective Mitchell, who sat at the far end of the shop, engrossed in her phone. Please refill, Detective Anthem requested, handing his cup to Wyatt, a man in his early 50s who worked at the cafe. Wyatt obliged, then Detective Anthem asked, "How long has she been coming here?" nodding towards Detective Mitchell. "As long as I can remember," Wyatt replied, handing him a freshly filled cup. "Was she here 2 days ago?" Detective Anthem inquired, as Wyatt cleaned the counter. "Yeah," Wyatt responded while continuing to clean. "She came in around 9 a.m. and left hurriedly at about 1 p.m., I believe it was duty calling." Detective Anthem probed further, "Did you notice anything unusual about her on that day?" Wyatt paused in his cleaning, moving closer to Detective Anthem. "Not really, why do you ask?" he inquired. Detective Anthem explained, "You mentioned her entry and departure times, so I was just curious if you keep track of your customers." Wyatt resumed his cleaning duties. "I usually note the time each customer spends here." "You arrived exactly at 12 p.m., looked around for about a minute, and then sat down here at precisely 12:02 p.m. What puzzles me most about her is that she's always on her phone. She spends most of her time here, glued to it," he said. Both men turned their attention to Detective Mitchell, who had just taken her eyes off her phone for the first time since Detective Anthem had entered the cafe. She noticed them looking at her and offered a smile. Detective Anthem paid for his coffee, dropping the money on the counter. "Can I use your back door?" he asked Wyatt. "Of course," Wyatt replied. "And you are leaving at exactly 12:30 p.m., he added. Detective Anthem exited the cafe and looked around for any possible CCTV cameras. He spotted two at the adjacent corner of the street, inspected them briefly, and then made his way back to his car. President Kennedy sat in the backyard of a private residence, holding a glass of whiskey in his hands. A small marble table stood beside him, featuring a bottle of whiskey and an empty glass. Opposite him was an unoccupied sofa. At the center of the yard, an electric barbecue grill sizzled, and next to it, Admirer calmly skinned a goat kid alive, while the president watched in distress. "It will soon be over," Admirer whispered to the struggling goat, gently and methodically removing its remaining skin. "You can now rest in peace," he said as he swiftly sliced the goat's throat. "I'm done," he announced to President Kennedy, carefully cleaning the bloodstains from his Italian suit. "Don't tell me you are mourning this," he said to President Kennedy, who is still in anguish from witnessing the goat's ordeal. "It's just an animal," he said. He took a seat on the empty sofa and poured himself a glass of whiskey, while the blood from the knife dripped onto the table. "Animal," Admirer exclaimed as he downed his drink. "They are very boring to kill. You won't hear them screaming or pleading for their lives, unlike humans," he continued. "I wonder what it would be like to skin a human alive. Let's just imagine what they would be pleading for. Would it be for me to end their miserable life quickly, or to allow them some minutes to settle with their creator, or maybe even to spare their lives? What would you be pleading for?" he asked President Kennedy, picking up the knife from the table and pressing the sharp edge firmly against his own skin. "Ah," he exclaimed as the knife cut into him. He smeared the blood from the self-inflicted wound on his lips. "What would you be pleading for?" he asked President Kennedy once more, his eyes locked onto the president's. "Maybe a second chance," President Kennedy replied. Admirer, frustrated, struck the knife on the table, spilling the drink on it. He grabbed President Kennedy by his shirt collar and placed his bleeding thumb on the president's lip. "And that I won't grant if you fail to bring back my money. I've kept my part of the bargain, and now it's your turn to keep yours. The chief of police sat in an interrogation room, visibly frustrated, facing a suspected member of the law crew. The suspect had refused to cooperate, demanding his lawyer, much like the others before him. "I need my lawyer and a glass of water, please," the suspect requested as the chief of police exited the interrogation room. "Give him a glass of water," the chief of police instructed Detective Anthem, who had been eyeing Detective Mitchell suspiciously during the interrogation. Detective Anthem sat at his office desk, his right leg propped up on his chair, staring at two printed CCTV footage clips. He found it hard to believe that the two individuals in the footage were not the same person. On his right-hand side, there was a clip of Detective Mitchell sitting at Greg's shop on the day of the hijacking, exactly at 12 p.m. On his left-hand side, there was a footage of a woman captured by one of the CCTV cameras at the back of Greg's shop at the same time, looking strikingly similar to Detective Mitchell, but in different attire. The chaplet on both women's hands drew his attention as he continued to scrutinize the footage.